Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about deductive reasoning, and the first thing I want to do is compare it to inductive reasoning, which is what we learned earlier this module in section 1. So as a quick reminder, inductive reasoning is when you look for patterns, and then based on a pattern you make what's called a conjecture, which at that point is really just a guess. We call it an educated guess. It's not just like a pull it out of thin air guess. We want to make sure we have a reason for our guess, but at that point it's just a guess. It's not a rule yet. Now, deductive reasoning is really what you use to take that guess and turn it into a rule. Because deductive reasoning uses definite 100% facts to come to a valid conclusion. So that's the difference. Inductive is like, hey, I think this might be a rule, and deductive is like, hey, this definitely is a rule. So we're going to break our lesson up into two new laws or rules. The first one is called law of detachment, and it's kind of funny. It's one of those rules where it's so simple and obvious it almost doesn't even need to be said. But we'll say it anyways. The law of detachment says if you have a conditional statement, an if-then statement, and the if part happens, then you can definitely 100% automatically conclude that the then part then happened also. So here's what I mean. Let's say we have this statement. If a car is out of gas, then it won't start. Okay, statement makes sense. Let's say it's a true statement. Now, somewhere in the middle of a word problem, it says, your car is out of gas. What can you conclude from that? That it won't start. And that's what I meant when I said it's so simple and obvious, it almost doesn't even need to be said. It doesn't need a name. It's just saying if you have if this, then that, and the if part happens, then the then part will also happen. You can draw that conclusion. It's called the law of detachment because it's just a way of detaching or taking apart the if and then. So you have this if-then statement. If the if part shows up in a problem and happens, then you can say the then part then also happens. Okay, our second law is probably a little bit more important. It's not quite as obvious as the first, and it's also a very important one. It's called the law of syllogism. And it's about taking two different if-then statements and linking them together. So let's do this. Let's take these two statements right here. Let's say I told you, if I don't want to cook dinner tonight, then I'm going to go to a restaurant. Okay, that's me saying that. It's a definite true statement. It's 100%. If I don't feel like cooking, I'm going to go to a restaurant. Let's just accept that as a true statement. Then I tell you after that, if I go to a restaurant, then I'm going to order a hamburger. And again, this is just me saying that this is 100%. I've already decided if I go to a restaurant, I'm definitely ordering a hamburger. So we have two separate statements, but what's important to notice here is that the two separate statements, the first statement ends with me going to a restaurant, and the second statement starts with me going to a restaurant. So what you can do is you can link them together. Because by the law of detachment, so let's say tonight I don't feel like cooking dinner. Okay, I don't feel like cooking dinner. Well, from the first if-then statement, that means I'm going to a restaurant. Now I'm definitely going to a restaurant. So the if part happened on the second one. And if that happens, then the then part happens. So basically it's a way of chaining together if-then statements. It only works if they do chain together. If one of them ends or the next one starts. If the then part matches with the if part of another statement, you can chain them together. So we chain these two statements together. The first one ended where the second one started. We put them together. Now what the law of syllogism really says is we can cut out that middle part and we can go straight from the first if to the last then. So what I could do, instead of me taking a lot of time to go through that middle part and me saying to you guys, hey, guess what? I don't want to cook tonight, so I'm going to go to a restaurant. And I'm going to go to a restaurant and order a hamburger. I can skip that whole part in the middle about going to a restaurant. And I can just say, if I don't want to cook, I'm going to go order a hamburger. And that's how the law of syllogism works. We are linking together if-then statements by taking the then of one of them, turning it into the if part of the next one, and then just completely cutting it out and going from beginning to end. And you can do it with more than two statements. You can go if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that. You can link together 5, 10, 100 statements. And as long as they're all valid statements and they're linked correctly, you can cut out all those middle statements and go straight from the first if to the last then. Okay, so let's look at this example here. We're going to say, can you draw a conclusion from the following two statements? Number one, if you're tired, then you won't do well in school. All right, makes sense. We'll accept that as true. Number two, if you don't get enough sleep, then you'll be tired. Okay, those both make sense. We're going to accept them both as true. Now, if you read them in order, they don't link up. The first one ends with you don't do well in school. The second one starts with you don't get enough sleep. That's not a match. If it doesn't match, you can't link them up. But they don't have to go in order. If-then statements can be moved around. So if you read it backwards, if you start with the second statement ends with you being tired, and the first one starts with you being tired. So there's your match. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this. This is going to be my first if. I'm going to skip right through the you being tired. I'm not going to say if you don't get enough sleep, you're tired, and if you're tired, you won't do well in school. I'm going to skip straight from the first if to the last then, and we're just going to kind of skip this part about being tired. We don't need that. So yes, I can draw a conclusion from these two statements. What I would say is, if I don't get enough sleep, then I'm not going to do well in school. And that's how the law of syllogism works. Now remember, what we're doing right now is we're doing it with sentences, just to practice using it. But in a few days, we're going to do this with math proofs, and this is going to be a very important step. This is how you write a math proof. We're going to be linking if-then statements, but it's not going to be sentences about being tired or doing well in school. It's going to be math things, like if it's a right angle, then it's 90 degrees. Or if these two angles are vertical angles, then they are congruent. We're going to take these theorems that we've been learning throughout the year, we're going to connect theorems and use them to write proofs. So right now I want you to just practice with sentences, just to make sure you understand the concept, and then we'll move into the math part.